All right, so here we are, the end of the Islanders dynasty. And it was ended by none other than the Edmonton Oilers in 1984. But, while it was ended by the Edmonton Oilers in 1984, the Islanders made it to the final again for that fifth season. And while I believe that the Oilers were the right team to win it, and there's 6 Hall of Famers on this roster, and you could argue there are a couple others that should be in there. Let's look at it. You got Gretzky, Anderson, Paul Coffey. I missed the L the first time. Pat Conacher, Lee Fogelin. It said Lee Fogelin Jr., but I don't think anybody's going to get confused. Is that him or his dad? Grant Fuhr, Randy Gregg, the doctor, Randy Gregg. Charlie Huddy, Pat Hughes, Dave Hunter, Don Jackson, Yari Curry, Willie Lindstrom, Ken Lensman, Kevin Lowe, Dave Lumley, Kevin McClelland, Mark Messier, Andy Moog, Yaroslav Puzar, and Dave Semenko. And those are the players who show in the actual guide and record book on the Stanley Cup roster. An interesting note, Rick Chartres, who was a member of 4 Stanley Cup winners in Montreal, was also a member of this team and played 1 game in those playoffs. Doesn't show in there. I'm pretty sure he's got a ring, though. So in 420 NHL games, that was his whole career. He had 5 Stanley Cup rings. So it's one of those weird notes you can make that Rick Chartres was part of 2 of the greatest teams in the history of hockey, and yet Rick Chartres will not be remembered by anybody, and he's got 5 Stanley Cup rings, so he likely doesn't care that he's not going to be remembered by anybody. But I guess I'm remembering him, so there's that. And I kind of pulled for the guy, to be honest. I liked his name, Chartres. I like that. So, Hall of Famers, you got Gretzky, Anderson, Coffey, Fuhr, Curry, and Messier. Those are all no-brainers. You could argue, I have argued, that Andy Moog, in his career, could be qualified as a Hall of Famer. Won a lot of games, played for a lot of teams, played for a long time, and I think him being in the Hall of Fame would make some sense. He did win 3 games in the playoffs that year, in 84. Kevin Lowe is another one that, as a defensive defenseman, if you want to go the Rod Langway route, I think Kevin Lowe was better than he's given credit for. I think his career as a GM kind of tarnished it, because, he kind of ran the Oilers into the ground. But as a player, Kevin Lowe was fantastic, and he was the epitome of the Oilers. Absolutely. It's a defense that's underrated, too, on this team. They just weren't asked to play it. Glenn Sather was coach and GM for this team. All right, now, interesting notes here. Hat tricks. Gretzky had 10. Curry had 5. Anderson had 3. Messier 2. Pat Hughes had 1, and Willie Lindstrom had 1. That's 22 hat tricks. Any given week, somebody on the Oilers got a hat trick. This team scored a lot of points. Regular season, Gretzky had 205, and I know what people are going to say. People are going to say, well, this was the live puck era, so Gretzky's stats, you got to adjust them, and, he wouldn't have been able to score at that rate today. Well, no kidding. Nobody says that he could have scored 200 points a year today. Well, look at that list for a second. Who's number 2 on the list? Paul Coffey with 126. It's a defenseman. In name only. Coffey was a rover. He really was. Anytime the puck went in across the line, Coffey was up with the forwards. There were 4 up and 1 back, and that 1 back was usually that Kevin Lowe guy I'm talking about. So it was his job to contain any mistakes these guys made. Curry was 3rd on the list at 113 points. Curry was Gretzky's winger. Gretzky outscored his winger by almost twice as many points. You got Messier down here, 101 points. Glenn Anderson, 99 points. And Lensman was 67. Proving that Ken Lensman was more than just a rat. Ken Lensman now is remembered as just a rat. Oh, rat. You mean Lensman. He plays like Lensman. Lensman was such a rat. What a rat. People forget Lensman could score goals. He could score points. He could play really well. Much like a lot of the guys now, it's frustrating to watch a guy play that way when he doesn't have to. Ken Lensman would have been a very good NHLer for a long time without being a rat. He just didn't want to be without, he wanted to be a Rat. That was his plan. And he executed the plan very well. So when you look at the penalty minutes, and this is what's interesting. So I've been talking about the Islanders and how big and tough they were. They were a tough team. The Oilers are your finesse team, right? Look at all these points. Well, look at the penalty minutes. 104 for Coffey, 165 for Messier, 119 for Linsman, 127 for Kevin McClellan, 125 for Lee Fogelin, 120 for Don Jackson, 118 for Dave Semenko in 52 games. It's a lot of penalty minutes for a finesse team, isn't it? Because the Oilers could fight anybody as well. The Oilers were tough. They were the most talented team, and they were tough. So when they met the Islanders again in that final, they remembered. They won 1-0 in the first game. They lost the second game 6-1. And after that second game, there was a lot of, here come the Islanders. The Oilers got that win. They're not going to get another one. But there was an interesting thing about the 1984 finals. It was a 2-3-2 format. 2 games in New York, 3 games in Edmonton. The last 2 games would be in New York. They never got back to New York. Edmonton won at home 7-2, 7-2, 5-2. The 2-3-2 format was used in the finals in 85 as well. And that was it. Never used again in the finals. And of course, the 2-3-2 format infamously would be used in the early 90s, which benefited my Vancouver Canucks in 94 especially. All you had to do was get a split on the road and then not lose at home. Because you get that split on the road, you come home, you win game 3. Now you're up 2-1. They have to at least win 1 in your barn, and then they've got to win both games at home. You're putting a lot of pressure on the other team. And as I said at the start of this, the Islanders had won 4 cups in a row. This was their 20th series in 5 years. They were tired. They were broken down, and these Oilers took advantage of that. They played 19 games in those playoffs. They beat Winnipeg, 3-game sweep in the first round. Again, it was only 15 games to win the cup in 84. Calgary was a 7-game series. That was the first Battle of Alberta. The first real Battle of Alberta where it felt like the cup was on the line. And Minnesota was a sweep. Now think about this for a second. They won the final in 5 games. They beat Calgary in 7. This was a frustrating time for the Calgary Flames. They were the second best team in hockey and couldn't get out of their own division. They got out of their own division twice. And they won the cup once, and they went to the cup final the other time. This was the frustration for the Flames. And as a guy who cheered for the Flames, it was my frustration as well. Yeah, I cheered for Vancouver and Calgary. It was a rough time in the 80s for me. Because one of them was good, and the other one was the Canucks. But either way, they both got knocked out by Edmonton on a regular basis. So in the playoffs, Gretzky had 35 points, Curry had 28, Messier 26, Coffey 22, Anderson 17, and again, Ken Linsman with 14, proving he wasn't just a rat. Of course, another interesting thing with this team is the Conn Smythe Trophy being awarded to Mark Messier. See, Gretzky was the number 1 point scorer. Gretzky was the top guy. But what stood out when they played in the playoffs was, and this mirrored the Islanders organization and their dynasty before that, there would be a standout guy who stole the show. Look at it this way. This year there were people who said Crosby shouldn't have won the Conn Smythe. Last year there were people who said Crosby shouldn't have won the Conn Smythe. If those Penguins had won the Cups in the 80s, he wouldn't have won those Conn Smythes. Phil Kessel would have won last year. And this year, I'm thinking Matt Murray might have got it. Because it wasn't necessarily the top guy. And while I'm fine with Crosby winning back-to-back, Conn Smythes and all that entails, personally, I think it's more fun when the Conn Smythe is awarded to the player who the guys say, you know what, he's our guy. He's our core guy. And for the Oilers, it was Messier. Messier didn't lead the team in scoring in the regular season, 101 points. He didn't lead the team in scoring in the playoffs, 26 points. He was the number 1 penalty minute guy, though, with 165. He was the prototypical power forward before there was one. Before Cam Neely and Talkett and a lot of other guys made it fashionable to be a power forward, he was that. He could score 50 goals. He could get 200 penalty minutes. And I was never a big Messier fan. I remember there was one playoff game where I thought that he dove, and obviously dove, and yet a penalty was called. But that's part of being a big star player. You get those calls. That's why I don't get as upset during playoff games as other people when some of these calls aren't made or are made in a way that's a little odd. And you say to yourself, wait a minute, that's not right. It was that way back then. The thing was, we didn't have 20 different camera angles, 15 replays, and 6 or 7 different sports networks to tell us how wrong that was and how stupid that was and how that cost a team a game. No. So, Messier and the rest of the Oilers, it was one of the most impressive runs any team had ever gone on, and they would do it again. This was the first of what would be 5 Stanley Cups. 4 of them with this Gretzky guy on it. The 5th team didn't have Gretzky on it. And you'll see, too, that their roster went through a greater amount of change during their dynasty than the Islanders ever did. The Islanders were very steady. The Islanders were the history teacher that's very, very set in his ways, very old-fashioned. The Oilers were that fun drama teacher that says, do what you want, have fun, be free, be happy. And score lots of points and get all kinds of penalty minutes and just go out there and just have fun. There wasn't a lot of structure with the Oilers. They didn't need it. They just outscored you 8-6, 10-9. It didn't matter. There was so much talent. It was like an all-star game every time they took the ice. So when I hear people talk about, oh, well, the Oilers, today's game, they'd get killed. They had a hell of a lot of talent. And they would have adapted very well to today's game. And honestly, while they wouldn't have put up these point totals, I wouldn't be surprised if the Oilers had, say, 4 of the top 10 scorers in the league if they'd played right now. Because they were just so deep. The problem is, to keep this team together, you'd have to have about $150 million salary cap. But I digress. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, and I'll talk to you again soon.